Help me! Would somebody please help me? I'm lost and I can't see.
It echoed through the alley in a thin, reedy voice that suggested brittleness of body and spirit. Who wouldn't hear that cry and feel a pang of sympathy? Are you so heartless that you'd ignore the desperate pleas for help of a blind man clearly in distress? For all you know, he might even be in danger. What if he walks into a road and gets hit by a car? Would you really want that on your conscience? Questions like these were flying through the head of the Good Samaritan when he decided to go and investigate, when it seemed like everyone else was just content to pretend they didn't hear it and carry on with their day as normal. The Good Samaritan was a person not unlike yourself. They were also the kind of person we all hoped and wished we would be in a situation such as this. Kindness and generosity is a virtue, after all. The problem is there are people out there who know this and are willing to take advantage of that kindness and generosity. But even worse is the fact that there are things that are definitely not people out there willing to take advantage of human compassion too. But back to the Good Samaritan. He approached the sound of the distressed man in the alley. He looked old and frail, hunched over with the weight of his years. He wore thick, dark glasses, and his white cane was laying on the road a few feet away from him. It was a tragic scene, but thankfully the Good Samaritan was here to help. He approached the old man calmly, telling him that it would be okay. The Good Samaritan picked up the walking cane and passed it over to the blind old man. His face spread into a warm smile and he said,
Thank you, young man. It warms my heart to know there are still good people like you on this earth.
The old man told the Good Samaritan that he'd come into town to get some fresh air and a little exercise, at which point he'd gotten lost. When the Good Samaritan asked whether it was safe for him to come alone, the old man told him that he always used to go on walks with his wife, but ever since the accident, she didn't seem to want to be seen in public. The Good Samaritan naturally felt for the old man, who seemed as sweet as he was feeble. He offered to escort the old man back to his house personally, wanting to make sure that he returned home safely. The old man smiled and graciously accepted, saying that his wife would probably want to thank the kind young man for helping him in person. Of course, the Good Samaritan was so wrapped up in the warm glow of doing a good deed that he never once stopped to question the strangeness of this whole situation. He just walked along with the old man, listening to him tell his fanciful stories as they left the city center and crept further into the sleepy outskirts of their small Kentucky town. He was just rambling on as old men tend to do. He told the Good Samaritan a little more about his beloved wife. She was a kind woman who'd he'd known for as long as he could remember. His elementary school sweetheart, then his high school girlfriend, and not long after they graduated, his beautiful blushing bride. Oh yes, she'd always been the prettiest lady, until the accident. Curiosity was getting the better of him. The Good Samaritan couldn't help but ask what exactly the accident he kept alluding to was, and the old man was all too happy to give him an answer. Not that this answer was in any way pleasant. His wife had been trapped in a terrible fire in town that gave her severe burns all over her body. She was lucky to be alive, but the flames took her beauty and her confidence away from her. Since then, she'd become a real homebody, often refusing to leave the house and rarely ever letting strangers see her. The Good Samaritan's heart ached for this poor old couple. Why were such nice people often forced to endure so much suffering? Did this old man even have anyone else to talk to? They reached his house soon enough. It was the furthest one on the end of the street, right next to the darkness of the woods. It looked old and dilapidated, but it wasn't like the old blind man could even know that. As they were walking up the small set of stairs to the porch, the old man stumbled slightly, causing his thick, dark glasses to fall to the floor. The Good Samaritan reflexively leaned over to pick up the glasses for the old man. As he passed them back, he noticed something strange. The old man wasn't just blind. He literally didn't have any eyes. Just two black, empty sockets where his eyes should be. The Good Samaritan was just thankful that the old man wasn't able to see him staring as he put the glasses back on. The two of them entered the house. The Good Samaritan was too busy thinking about the old man's empty eye sockets to even notice him locking the door behind them, and by then, it was already too late for him. The old man called out into the dark expanse of the house.
Sweetheart, I've got you a live one.
Before the Good Samaritan could ask what he actually meant by that, The old man shuffled off, deftly navigating the halls through memory alone, and took one of the 2 seats at the dining table. He just sat there, smiling, waiting. That's when the Good Samaritan heard the creaking sound coming from above, something moving up in the darkness of the 2nd floor, and then descending the stairs with heavy, clomping footsteps. When his eyes came into focus in the dark, he saw it there, the most terrifying thing he'd ever witnessed, coming down the stairs towards him. It was vaguely human in its shape alone, but in all other respects, it was a monster through and through. This gnarled, twisted creature with bulging eyes, dead flesh, and filthy, exposed fangs, like it stepped straight out of a nightmare and into the physical world where it did not belong. There looked to be a huge hole in its lower torso too, with no blood or organs inside, just an infinite blackness. The creature's lipless mouth twisted into a smile. The creature said something in a voice that the Good Samaritan couldn't understand. It was the Black Tongue, something ancient, terrifying, and unknown. As the creature got closer and closer, the Good Samaritan turned and made a run for the door. He tried to figure out the lock, his hands fumbling and uncoordinated by fear. He could hear the footsteps and the heavy breathing of that thing getting closer behind him. He was so close, almost there. That's when a strange black substance seemed to encase the world around him. It separated him from the door he was so nearly able to breach, locking him in. He was trapped inside what looked like a giant black sphere made of some unknown material or energy. He turned to see that monster standing right behind him, just grinning and waiting for the inevitability of this situation to sink in. The Good Samaritan had never been more terrified. Something else began to shift inside the sphere. A structure was growing out of the ground up and around him like a cage within a cage. He was trapped and huddled inside a strange conical structure as more figures entered the sphere around him. They were just like the first, this horrible horde of desiccated not people, all with grinning, lipless mouths. When they closed in on him, the Good Samaritan had the one consolation that at least it was over. But it wasn't. Not yet. The blind old man waited in the kitchen for 5 hours as unmentionable horrors unfolded inside the black sphere. The Good Samaritan was actually lucky all in all, because for some sessions for victims inside the sphere had lasted as long as 27 hours. He screamed the entire time, with the sphere finally demanifesting just moments after the screaming stopped. Remaining was only one of the creatures, but no Good Samaritan. Just several neat piles of human organs, arranged by organ type.
Are you down in there, honey?
The blind old man asked.
I've been getting awfully hungry.
The creature replied in perfect English.
Yes, yeah. I think you have some supper before you go to bed.
The creature picked up some of the discarded organs and took them into the kitchen, where it began cooking them into a stew for the old man. He ate the stew not long after, blissfully ignorant to its contents, and went to sleep. Whatever organs from the Good Samaritan weren't used in the stew were simply thrown into the fireplace to burn away into ashes. Later that night, the old man would die peacefully of a heart attack in his sleep at age 81. He spent the latter 10 years of his life in service of SCP-957. He'd never even had a wife, and when the monster first invaded his home, he wasn't even blind. He'd simply come home one day to find SCP-957 lurking in his home, waiting for him. As far as the SCP Foundation is aware, it always targets people who live alone. The man had tried to resist, but the creature was freakishly strong in spite of its wiry frame. It grabbed him and forced his body into the dark gaping chasm of its chest. He was swallowed up into another world on the other side of the void, and returned 4 hours later, a changed man. His eyes were gone, and he now firmly believed that SCP-957 was his beloved, if burnt-scarred wife of many years. He'd do anything for her, even heading out into the world and feigning distress to lure people back into her terrible clutches. That's how the old man became SCP-957-1. He wasn't the first, and wouldn't be the last. With the old man now dead, SCP-957 would demanifest and head off in search of a new victim, invading their home and repeating the cycle once more somewhere else. The somewhat happy ending is that in one of these cases, the SCP Foundation somehow got wise to the baiting activities of SCP-957, and they were able to contain the creature, giving it the Keter object class for its frequent attempts to either get out or lure in new victims. It's never been actively hostile to Foundation researchers and guards, just a little obtuse. Despite the fact that it's perfectly capable of speaking fluent English, it prefers to speak in an unknown dead language for somewhat mysterious reasons. Very little is known about the origins or true nature of SCP-957, but our brief glimpse into its interior life does little to comfort us. In 2008, the Foundation recorded 957 having a conversation with an unseen individual in its native tongue. Foundation linguistic experts have been able to partially crack the code on what was being said that day. 957 asked the unseen figure how much longer it would have to stay here. The figure told it that it would need to wait there for a while, and that its disguise was extremely convincing. 957 complained that being here was boring and tiresome, but the unseen figure urged 957 to remain patient. It said,
"We have to let them watch the few, so that the many can move freely. We will be done with our research soon enough."
Now go check out SCP-1861, the crew of the HMS Wintersheimer, and SCP-5049, the skin salesman Demon Dan's Discount Homunculus Depot, for more of the most terrifying anomalous beings out there.